Hey gang, we are at Fairhaven Memorial Park Cemetery. We're in Santa Ana, Orange County, California. And I'm going to give a quick shout out here to Redheaded Tsunami, one of our viewers who gave me the suggestion. I have heard about this guy. Have you ever heard of Wrong Way Corrigan? Yeah, that guy who, now if you're like me, back before I knew this story many years ago, I heard this name on and off. I always thought, it was the story about this Douglas Corrigan guy who was a pilot, and he took off from California to New York, and he was supposed to go back to California, but he flew the wrong way, ended up flying through the fog all the way east to Dublin, Ireland. Well, there's a lot more to the story, and it's a very interesting story for those of you that don't know. So let's take a walk here, beautiful cemetery, and I'll tell you the story. He was born in Texas, Galveston, Texas, as a young man of Irish descent, and he got interested in flying right away. Like others, like the chocolate bomber, we did that episode, just looking up and seeing an airplane fly by one day captured his interest, as many young men back in the day. So he was actually born Clyde Corrigan, his original name. He changed it to Douglas. And he didn't seem to be very motivated for many things, or in many things, when he was younger, he would say. He quit high school before graduating, and his first jobs were in construction. After that, when he was 18 years old, he saw people, they were paying to be, they're going for a plane ride. He was at this place where there was a Curtiss JN4, call that a Jenny. It was a biplane, and he paid the $2.50 to get the ride. A week later, he began flying lessons, and the next thing you know, he made his first solo flight on March 25th, 1926, and that really started his flying career. He went to work for a company, a very small company back then, called Ryan Aeronautical Company, San Diego. He was at the factory, 1926, and that happens to be the plane, by no coincidence, I guess we could say, that Charles Lindbergh, they built the plane that Charles Lindbergh made the famous flight. And Douglas would work on the plane. He was a key player. He was a key mechanic. He actually put the instrument panel together, and he also increased the size of the wing. I think it was by 10 feet. It's rather dramatic. But he was pretty handy, and he contributed to that. And it's kind of funny because he said when he first saw Charles Lindbergh, he's like, yeah, this guy just looks like some farmer. Wasn't impressed. We have the Charles Lindbergh episode. I'm not impressed either as a pilot. That's another story. But yeah, he was pretty intrigued with that. I mean, once that happened, once he saw Lindbergh, he said, oh, I want to do that. I can do that. And from then on, he was absolutely obsessed with making a transatlantic flight. But he wanted to go to Ireland. He didn't want to go to Paris. He wanted to go to Ireland because, of course, he's Irish. So he went about starting his plan, and the first thing that he did was he got himself an airplane called a Curtiss Robin, small plane, and he had to get an experimental license for that. it was kind of put together, cobbled together. He made all sorts of crazy modifications. And he had inspectors look at it, and they pretty much deemed it to be unstable. They were starting to get picky because a lot of people in those days were trying to make these crazy flights, and a lot of people were dying, disappearing over the Atlantic and all kinds of other stuff. So the federal authorities, they really started to buckle down on all of this kind of stuff, and that would become a barrier for him as he tried to move forward. So after he purchased the plane, of course, he tried. Well, the predecessor to the FAA was the Bureau of Air Commerce, 1935. They said, nope, not going to happen. 2 years later, another full reapplication process. Nope, you ain't going to go. And by 1937, he had continued to make modifications. And again, it's not going to happen. Now, this was the year that Amelia Earhart disappeared. And at that point, he was like, she disappeared, assumably, at Howe Island, by Howe Island. And then he thought, you know what, it's game over for me. I got to think of another way. These guys are never going to let me do this. They wanted him to have a radio operator's license, all of these things. And he said, well, I'm going to make my plane just pure experimental. And that's how I'm going to get around this stuff. Now, to tell you a little bit about, let me just tell you a little bit about experimental. Experimental is the category. We have categories today for aircraft, and the biggest, the normal one is, most common ones, it's a certified aircraft. But if you can't get it certified, you go experimental. And you can basically almost do whatever you want, and you can fly it. And I will tell you, there's some good experimental planes, and there are some dangerous ones. There was a guy, funny story, when I was in Campbell Airport. It was Campbell Airport, Grays Lake, Illinois, when I was first a pilot. Got my first seaplane. And there was, we'd hang out the hangar. I'd take my little son Danny there. He was little at the time. It was like Field of Dreams. The field and the great times there, sitting by the aircraft, working on the aircraft. And at the hangar down the way there was another guy. He was a Frenchman. He was a proctologist. I don't remember his name. He's probably still there. But he was kind of doing the same thing, not crossing the Atlantic, but he was building his own jalopy out of all kinds of weird parts. And it was an experimental airplane. So we would watch him go up, and he would it looked like he was going to stall. And I talked to Jim Tahaney was his name. He's passed away. He said, oh yeah, we had to pick him up a few times. One time, from crashes. One time I think the airplane was burning. They had to pull him out of a burning airplane. Anyway, that's experimental. So that's what Douglas was doing. He's got the experimental thing going. And the only thing that they would let him do, they said, all right, you know what, we'll give you a permission to go from California to New York, and then you got to come back again. Nothing else. And he got it under experimental, but he got it as he wouldn't have even gotten that probably, but he said, this is a test flight. They're like, okay. So he flies, and he has a fuel leak on the way. It's like the whole inside of the cabin is like filling with fuel. He's got his head out the window, and he makes it to New York. He flies from New York from one field to this other field where Howard Hughes is. I think he's thinking, I'm going to go there because everyone's watching Howard Hughes and his flight around the world. He was about to take off. And nobody's going to see what I'm going to be doing because I got some tricks up my sleeve. So he makes it to this other field and he's like, well, I got to do this flight. If I'm going to make my move to Ireland, this is the time. So what does he do? With this fuel leak, he's got like 300 gallons of fuel. The thing could barely take off, 3,000 foot of runway, use the whole runway. And he gets in the air, and instead of turning west to California, like he's supposed to, he just goes east. And I think it was 28 hours, this man, with nothing but a box of fig bars and a couple of chocolate bars. And now this leak, he's like halfway across, and this is like pouring out. It's getting really bad. So it's like, we're going to be short of fuel, but this could, you know, the exhaust, this whole plane could just blow up right in the middle of the Atlantic of a 28-hour flight. So what does he do? He takes a screwdriver, pokes a hole in the floor on the opposite side of where the exhaust is. So hopefully as the fuel vaporizes and drains out, it's not going to catch fire. Can you imagine catching fire? Burn the tail off first. Oh, you're just gone. Never to be found. And it works. Next thing you know, like I said, 28 hours later, he's in Dublin. He lands at some field and they're like, who are you? He's like, how you doing? Just came from New York. Well, they didn't know what to do with him. He had no passport. They're like, you know, it's unprecedented. So everybody was pretty, you know, the Irish loved it. Even it went all the way to the president. He's like, hey, thanks for bringing attention to Ireland. You're awesome. And of course, the bureau back in the States here, they said, oh, your license is now suspended. 2-week suspension. Well, what did he care? He was bringing that. He was coming, and the plane was called Little Sunshine. So he brought Sunshine back on a steamship. So that 2 weeks he spent over the ocean on a steamship. And what happens? He comes back to the United States, New York. He gets a bigger ticker tape parade than Charles Lindbergh. Over 1 million people. He's like a hero. He's as big a hero as Lindbergh, if not bigger. And the President Roosevelt loves him, and oh my gosh, it's crazy. It's so cool. And basically what he stood for was, you know, the American way, I guess. I think that's why President Roosevelt liked him. He said something to the effect of, you know, this is how we are. We don't take no for an answer. And we don't depend on the government, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, he was loved. Went on to make a movie, which he got $75,000 to do, which is 30 years of income, salary as an aircraft mechanic. So he basically said, I'm going to take this money, buy an orange grove, and retire. Oh, he had a couple of years of commercial service and things. I think it was 1950, retired. And wrote a book and lived on a great life. And here he is. This is his grave, Douglas Corrigan, Wrong Way Corrigan. We have arrived. A very simple stone with his signature. The cool part of this story is that he would never admit. He was even on a game show. And they said, it was, of course, to tell the truth, right? And they're like, all right, if there's anywhere to tell the truth, this is it. And he said, this is my story. I went the wrong way. I made a mistake. I love it. The moral of the story, though, is he knew what he was doing. And he was a clever a clever man, and he was industrious. And industrious is what we in America are known for, is industrious and innovative and not lazy. Make it happen yourself. That's what Douglas stands for. Douglas Corrigan, that's what he really stood for, and that's what his legacy is going to remain. Interesting guy. So in October of 2019, we can say just over 3 years ago, his Curtiss Robin was delivered to the Plains of Fame Air Museum in Chino, California, and that is where it is at today if you want to see that actual airplane. So Douglas Corrigan, wrong way Corrigan, rest in peace.